I was 7 years old when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. I didn't know there was such a place as Japan. I had never heard of Japan before. And it happened there on a Sunday morning. I don't know how that relates to what time we were here. You can figure that out for me, Eric.
I will.
But the first I heard of it was on our radio at home. And that's the way we communicated with the world, newspapers and radio. The radio that we had on the farm stood up about this high, and the radio was in the top section up here. And then it was a console, was built to the floor, and in that open space in the back is where the battery went. The radio battery was like this long and about this high and about that thick. So it was huge. And that's how we heard about Pearl Harbor. And my mom and dad also took a newspaper, the Kansas City Star. There was no Tulsa World, but everybody through this part of the country took the Kansas City paper. Okay, so I was 7 and I had never heard of Japan. But when I got to school, I don't know if it was the next day or when, we started hearing about Japan and what had happened in Pearl Harbor. And of course the news spread, and high school boys were leaving school to go volunteer for the Army. And sometimes there would be half a class left because all the boys 16 and 17 years old had gone to sign up for the military. And if they were under 18, their parents had to sign for them. I had 6 uncles who fought in World War II. 2 of them were brothers to my mother, and 4 were brothers to my dad. My dad was 34 years old when this World War II broke out. And the big scare in our home was that he was going to have to leave us and go to war. But after he became 36, he got a notice from the draft board that because he was a farmer, he had 4 children, and his age was now 36, he was not eligible for the draft anymore. And you can't imagine the joy that we felt. He was pretty close to your age.
Mm-hmm.
And the war effort is how everybody referred to this. Everybody did their part for the war effort. My grandmother Mitchell walked 4 or 5 miles once a month and met at the Barron School with other ladies, and they packed comforts to send overseas to the servicemen. So that's how the older ladies were doing their part for the war effort. We school children were taking our pennies to school, and the teachers would collect our pennies and pool them and buy war bonds for us. A $25 war bond you could buy for $18.75. And I think our school bought a lot of them. Also, we collected scrap iron, and there would be a truck come through the countryside several times a year, and we had piled like plow points and whatever metal, especially iron, that we could find on the farm, and piled it down by the driveway, and this truck would come through the country and pick up that iron, and that it would go to different plants for the war effort. all the manufacturing plants did not manufacture appliances anymore because they were working on parts for the war effort. No cars were manufactured. If you check with Ford and Chevrolet, you'll find out that they did not build cars during those years because they were working on parts and planes and everything for the war. You couldn't buy appliances because they were not being made. You couldn't go to a store and buy shoes, sugar, shortening, meat, a lot of things because those things were all rationed. There was a rationing board that everyone had to go to and sign up the size of their family, and according to the size of your family, you got a book of stamps. That was your rationing stamps. I think each family got 2 stamps a year for shoes. So our family of 6 would have had 12 stamps for a year where we could buy 12 pair of shoes. And if you wore your shoes out, too bad. I have seen Dad take wires and wire my soles onto my shoes because we were out of stamps. Most people on the farm raised their own meat. Like my dad raised cattle and sheep and pigs, and so we had our own meat at home. But you would run out of sugar because you didn't have any more stamps left. And also butter, and they invented margarine during these war years because butter was short and you had to have stamps to buy it. And some families I know would trade their stamps, like I don't eat butter, so my butter stamps could have gone to somebody else. Yeah, Jackie could have used my butter stamps.
Did people ever trade stamps like that?
Pardon?
Did people trade their stamps
Yes.
like that? Yeah.
People trade their rationing stamps, and I can remember what the little books looked like. I went with my mother when she signed our family up for rationing stamps, and you open the little books, there was the stamps with the perforated strips, and you just tear out what you need. That was a big thing, the rationing was. And people would run out of shortening or lard, and a big thing was to buy mineral oil to cook with. And it had a taste, and you didn't like the taste, but that's how people lived during the war years. And we all worked together for the war effort, and that's how we referred to it. It was the war effort. And my uncles, several of them, were in intense fighting in Germany. I had one uncle who was in the Army Air Force. This was before Air Force was separate. It was still a part of the Army. And he went on bombing missions over Germany, got shot down twice. And one time they had one motor left. They were trying to get back to England. And one of the guys on the plane kept telling the pilot, let's go to Switzerland and we can just hang out in a hotel till the war is over. But the pilot got them back to England, to their base.
Which uncle was that, Mom? Which uncle?
Donald.
Donald, okay.
Another time they were shot down and he had to parachute out. And they parachuted into Germany, and thankfully a German family took him in and kept him hidden until he could be rescued. That was very interesting. I had another uncle one of my dad's brothers that was with General Patton, and I know you've heard about the Battle of the Bulge. My uncle was in that battle.
Which one was that? JB?
Gene.
Jean.
I remember my grandpa coming over to our house and telling my dad, and they didn't know that I could hear them talk, but I did. He said, "I think Gene is dead." And Dad said, "Why do you think that?" And he said, "Well, I haven't had a letter from him for 2 months, and I think he's not with us anymore, or he would be writing." Well, it turned out he was in the fight, the Battle of the Bulge, and couldn't get any mail out, but he did come home safe and sound. Another uncle came back with what they called shell-shocked, and you didn't make any unexpected noises behind him, or he would just jump out of his skin. And you just had to be real careful about noises around him. They have another term for that now. It's not shell-shocked. It's,
PTSD.
yeah. And that was the 3 uncles that I remember. Well, another one, George, he had a story to tell too, but they rarely ever told their personal experiences. But we got this a little bit from him and more from a guy that served with him that let the family know what had happened. It was infantry. They were fighting face to face. They had their trenches dug, and Uncle George gets up and tries to advance, and here's a German soldier in front of him with a rifle and a bayonet pulled on him. They could see each other, and George fainted. When he woke up, he was in a hospital, and we never knew what happened at the end. We don't know if somebody helped Uncle George escape. We don't know what happened to the German soldier, but what we know is that he was shell-shocked from then on, and he died early, like he was early 60s. So that could have been a part of it.
Maybe he acted, but he blacked out on that part. No, maybe he didn't just faint. Maybe he did act and just blacked out.
I think it was gone from his mind. I think it scared him so badly that he couldn't ever talk about it again. What little he told us was all he could do. And you can imagine how excited everyone was when the war was over. Japan had the 2 bombs dropped on their country, and it didn't take but a few days for them to surrender after that happened. And Germany, our soldiers went through and just captured Germany on the ground, and they surrendered. So that's what I remember about World War II. And you hear lots of discussion these days about people arguing about war, and nobody seems to agree on anything. But back then, everybody was united and all together on the war effort. So that's how I remember it.
Thank you, Grandma.
Thank you. That was interesting.